Are there negatives in this world, or only a lack of positives? In a previous blog post, not this voice BTW, she's AI, hopefully not trying to take over Smile, attempted to understand whether there is more positive or negative in this world in general. As a rough estimate, positives and negatives could be considered equal. But the existence of both quantities should equal better than zero. This estimate was an assumption that actions and occurrences in this world are both negative and positive. But, to understand things more accurately, what are positives or negatives? Naturally, a negative does not exist, that we know of. There are objects or substances, positive quantity, or there are no objects, zero. Negatives are a mathematically constructed concept, coming from the idea of having objects, then taking one or some away. If the only way to create a negative is to take away positives, it seems a negative is only a lack of positive regarding the physical world. Taking this into real-life situations, being in poverty might be considered a negative concept to live with. But having little or no resources is not a negative quantity of resources, it's a lack of a positive quantity of resources. Losing a job may be considered a negative occurrence, but it is losing a positive quantity that was gained, and which was not there to begin with. Or having your bike stolen, as has happened to me 4 times, is losing a previously gained positive, rather than an overall negative. If it is assumed that there are no fundamental negatives, then the only negatives to be considered are lacks of positives. If this perspective is taken, then what degree of positive should be taken into consideration to determine the present negative? By that logic, should any lack in the maximum possible positives in life be considered a negative? The maximum possible positive quantities are far beyond what any person has ever possessed, so by this interpretation, everyone should be considered to have an immense amount of negatives. This seems like a mathematically and physically realistic, faulty perspective. And mental positivity should be another concept to consider here. For someone to perceive a negative or positive mentally is more subjective and less distinct. This is related to morals, which seem to be based on what we perceive as good or bad, and which seems to derive from instinctual reinforcement triggers. A mental positive or negative seems to stem from that which instinctually drives us to pursue or avoid something. Perhaps this contradicts the idea of no negatives, as it seems with physical quantities. But does the concept of lack of positives, creating a mistaken interpretation of negatives, apply to mentality as well? If someone receives mental positivity, then loses it, is that a legitimate negative, or a mistaken interpretation of a lack of positive? The physical result of feeling negative reinforcement seems it would be similar, if from the perception of lacking a positive. One difference would be the factor of perception, which should allow for much easier variances in degree of mental negativity. There should be much more potential to reduce or even counteract the resulting negativity by consciously altering perception. It seems that in physical quantities within this world, there are no negative sums, but rather positives or a lack of positives, which perhaps can be carried over to mental negatives. Even though it may be incredibly difficult at times, the step of perceiving the complexities of life gives an allowance to focus on the positives and the potential for the result to be Positron.